It started like any other day in the peaceful suburban neighborhood I had called home for years. The sun was shining, the birds were chirping, and I was sipping my morning coffee, enjoying the serenity of my backyard. But little did I know, a storm was brewing that would shake up everything I thought I knew about my quiet, comfortable life. The backyard was my pride and joy. Over the years, I had poured my heart into creating a space that felt like an oasis, a place where I could unwind, escape the stresses of daily life, and enjoy nature. One of the features that brought me the most joy was the fountain I had installed a few years ago. It wasn't anything extravagant, but it was a beautiful addition: smooth stones, a gently flowing stream of water, and soft, calming sounds that made the entire yard feel like a retreat. I had always admired fountains growing up. Their gentle water sounds were soothing, and they added a touch of elegance to any garden or outdoor space. When I moved into the house, I made sure to design the yard in a way that matched my vision. The fountain sat in the center of the yard, surrounded by blooming flowers and greenery. It wasn't just a decoration. It was a symbol of the peace I had worked so hard to create in my life. But this fountain, as peaceful as it was, became the center of a storm that I never saw coming. One afternoon, while I was gardening, I noticed a woman standing at the edge of my yard, staring at the fountain. I had never seen her before, so I figured she was a neighbor or someone passing through. I waved politely and went back to my work, but the woman walked closer. She had a stern expression on her face, and I could feel something was off. "Excuse me," she said in a clipped tone. "I'm Karen. I live 2 doors down. I need to speak with you about that fountain." I stood up, wiping the sweat from my forehead. "Oh, sure. What's the issue?" She pointed to the fountain, her finger almost trembling with frustration. "That fountain. It's an eyesore. It doesn't belong here. You need to remove it immediately." I was stunned. "What do you mean? It's just a fountain. It's part of my garden. It's not hurting anyone." Karen crossed her arms, her lips curling into a disapproving frown. "You're in violation of the HOA guidelines. All outdoor structures, including fountains, need to be approved by the Homeowners Association. You didn't get approval, and that thing is completely out of place." I couldn't believe my ears. The HOA, my fountain, which had been the centerpiece of my peaceful backyard, was now a violation in her eyes? I had lived here for several years and had never been told that I needed approval for such a simple addition. "I'm sorry, but I didn't know about any approval process for fountains. This is just a small feature in my yard." She glared at me, her voice cold and dismissive. "Well, you should have known. I'm giving you a week to remove it. If it's not gone by then, I'll report you to the HOA." The encounter left me dumbfounded. Karen walked off, leaving me standing there in disbelief. I was still processing what had just happened when I heard a knock at the door later that evening. When I opened it, there she was again, Karen, this time holding a piece of paper in her hand. "This is your official warning," she said, thrusting the paper toward me. "You have until next week to remove the fountain. I'll be watching." I stared at the paper in shock. It was a notice from the HOA, demanding that I remove the fountain because it wasn't approved and violated community guidelines. I tried to remain calm, but a surge of anger and confusion bubbled up inside me. How could this be happening? I had always kept my yard well maintained and followed the rules. I never imagined that something as innocuous as a fountain could cause such a problem. But what puzzled me even more was Karen's attitude. Why was she so adamant about this? There had to be more to the story than just some HOA rule. That night, I began researching the HOA guidelines. I looked up the rules on outdoor structures, fountains, and anything else that might apply to my situation. To my dismay, the guidelines did mention approval for exterior modifications, but it didn't specifically mention fountains. As far as I could tell, I hadn't violated any clear rule. But why was Karen so sure? What was driving her to act this way? The next few days were filled with frustration. I considered contacting the HOA to explain the situation, but I wasn't sure if it would do any good. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Karen was probably acting out of personal disdain for the fountain rather than a legitimate concern about HOA rules. Finally, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I went over to Karen's house, hoping to have a calm and rational conversation with her. I needed to understand why she was so insistent on making me remove the fountain. Maybe there was something I was missing, something that would make sense of this bizarre confrontation. When she answered the door, her eyes narrowed upon seeing me. "What do you want?" she asked sharply. "I just want to talk," I said, trying to keep my tone friendly. "I don't understand why the fountain is such a big issue. Can we sit down and discuss it?" Karen hesitated but finally stepped aside, letting me enter. We sat down in her living room, and I tried to explain my perspective. I told her how much the fountain meant to me and how it had been an integral part of my yard. I also explained that I had no idea about the HOA approval process for something so simple. I asked her to help me understand what the real problem was. Karen's face softened for just a moment, and for a brief second, I thought maybe we were getting somewhere. But then, with a sigh, she revealed something I hadn't expected. "You don't understand," she said, her voice quieter now. "That fountain, it was built by my late father." Karen's words hit me like a ton of bricks. Her late father had built the fountain? I was stunned. All this time, I thought I was fighting a petty HOA complaint about a simple backyard feature, but now it seemed like there was a far deeper personal issue at play. Her voice softened as she continued. "My father was a man of pride. When he built that fountain, he poured his heart and soul into it. It wasn't just a decorative piece. It was a symbol of his craftsmanship, his legacy. And now, to see someone else put it in their yard, without any consideration for its history, it's disrespectful." For the first time in the entire ordeal, I found myself feeling sympathy for Karen. She had lost someone close to her, and the fountain, a piece of her father's work, carried immense sentimental value. I could see why she was upset, but what struck me as odd was the intensity of her reaction. "I didn't know," I said, trying to clarify my stance. "I had no idea about its significance. I thought it was just a part of my property. I never intended to disrespect your father or anything related to that fountain." Karen paused, as if considering my words. There was a flicker of something in her eyes, but she quickly masked it with an impassive expression. "I don't think you meant to disrespect him," she said quietly, "but it feels like his legacy is being diminished. It's a part of my father that I can't let go of." I understood now. Karen wasn't just mad about the fountain because of some HOA rule. It was about preserving a memory of her father. That's why she had reacted so strongly. I could imagine how it must have felt to see something so deeply connected to a loved one, now sitting in someone else's yard, someone who didn't even know the significance of it. The fountain wasn't just stone and water to her. It was her father's craftsmanship, his love, and his memory. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized there was a solution. "I understand now, Karen. I really do. But I'm not asking you to erase your father's legacy. This fountain, it's still here, and I can see it holds great meaning for you. What if we work together to find a way for both of us to enjoy it?" She looked at me, eyes narrowing again, as if she wasn't sure what I meant. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that we could maybe collaborate," I said cautiously. "What if we moved the fountain to a more appropriate location, or perhaps even restored it as a community piece? There has to be a way to keep its significance alive, while also making it something that the neighborhood can appreciate. Maybe it can become a memorial in a public space, something that everyone can admire and remember." For a moment, Karen was silent. She stared at the ground, her fingers nervously twisting the edge of her sleeve. It was as if she were weighing my suggestion carefully, trying to decide whether she could accept such a compromise. "I don't know," she muttered. I never thought it would be like this. My father built it with such care. It's not just some decoration. He put so much into it." Her voice cracked, and for a moment, I could hear the vulnerability behind her words. "I can't just let it go." "I don't want you to let it go," I responded softly. "I respect what your father did, and I want to help honor that. If we can't keep it exactly where it is, maybe we can find a better place, somewhere that respects its significance, but also brings it into the larger community. That way, your father's legacy will be shared with everyone." Karen's eyes filled with emotion, and for the first time since we started this conversation, I saw a softening in her expression. She wasn't angry anymore. She was torn between her grief and her attachment to the fountain, and the possibility of letting it go for the sake of peace. Maybe I need time to think about it, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Take all the time you need, I reassured her. There's no rush. I'm not going anywhere, and I'm happy to work with you on whatever you decide. You've lost something important to you, and I understand that. I just want to help make it right. There was a long pause. Karen looked out the window, her gaze distant, lost in thought. I sat quietly, giving her the space she needed to process everything. Finally, she spoke again, this time more thoughtfully. You're right, she said, her voice steadier now. Maybe it doesn't have to be just mine. Maybe we can make it a part of something bigger, something that honors my father's memory, but also lets other people appreciate it. Maybe that's the best way. I felt a sense of relief wash over me. We had reached an understanding. It wasn't an easy resolution, but it was a start. Karen wasn't going to force me to remove the fountain, and I wasn't going to argue with her about the importance of her father's legacy. Instead, we had found a compromise, a way to respect the past while still allowing for change and growth in the neighborhood. But as I left Karen's house that day, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. Would the rest of the neighborhood understand our decision? Would the HOA be willing to allow a special exception for a memorial fountain? The issues that seemed so personal were now tangled with bureaucracy, and I knew that getting the HOA on board would be the next challenge. After my conversation with Karen, I felt a sense of hope, but I knew there was still work to be done. It wasn't just about keeping the fountain. It was about finding a way to unite the community around it, to honor Karen's late father's legacy while adhering to the rules of the HOA. As much as Karen was now on board with the idea of finding a compromise, I knew it wouldn't be easy to convince the HOA. They weren't exactly known for bending their rules, especially when it came to anything that could disrupt the neighborhood's aesthetic. I decided to take action quickly. The first step was to reach out to the HOA. I drafted a formal letter, explaining the situation and offering a proposal. In the letter, I outlined our intentions, Karen's desire to preserve her father's fountain, and my willingness to work together to make it a piece that could benefit the entire neighborhood. I proposed that we move the fountain to a community area, a park or a public space, where it could serve as a memorial, an art piece, and a source of pride for everyone in the neighborhood. The idea was that this fountain wouldn't just be a personal object anymore. It would become a symbol of the community's respect for its history, the importance of family, and the spirit of compromise. I wasn't just asking for permission to keep the fountain in my backyard. I was asking for the HOA's blessing to transform it into a shared treasure. When I submitted the letter to the HOA, I expected pushback. I knew they had strict rules about what could be installed in public spaces, and I anticipated a long, drawn-out process of negotiations. But to my surprise, the HOA responded quickly. Within a week, they arranged a meeting to discuss our proposal. Karen and I were invited to present our case to the board, and for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt like we had a real chance to create something beautiful for the entire neighborhood. The day of the meeting arrived, and I felt a mix of nervousness and anticipation. Karen was with me, though she remained quiet as we entered the HOA office. The board members were seated around a long table, some of them looking skeptical, others cautiously optimistic. I had prepared my presentation carefully, hoping to make a strong case for our proposal. I explained how the fountain had personal significance for Karen and her family, and how we wanted to honor that legacy by sharing it with the community. The key part of my presentation was focusing on the benefits to the neighborhood. I emphasized how the fountain could become a community focal point, a place where people could gather, reflect, and take pride in their history. I also pointed out that it would enhance the neighborhood's appeal, especially for prospective buyers who were increasingly looking for homes in eco-conscious communities. After all, incorporating art, history, and sustainability into a neighborhood could only be a good thing. To my surprise, the HOA members seemed to be listening. The usually rigid board members were more open-minded than I had expected. One of the board members, a woman named Mrs. Lawson, spoke up. "This is an interesting proposal," she said. "We've always been concerned about maintaining the uniformity of the neighborhood, but this is different. It's not just about aesthetics, it's about legacy. I think we should explore the idea further." It was a breakthrough moment. The board didn't immediately approve the proposal, but they agreed to form a committee to evaluate the details. They wanted to ensure that the fountain would be placed in a location that made sense and that it wouldn't disrupt the flow of the community. They also wanted to make sure the installation wouldn't require any major structural changes to the area. I left the meeting feeling a sense of cautious optimism. The HOA hadn't given us a green light yet, but they hadn't shot down the idea either. The door was open, and it was up to us to make sure that everything fell into place. Over the next few weeks, Karen and I worked together to select a location for the fountain. We found a small, unused patch of land near the community center, a place that wasn't being used for anything else but had the potential to become something special. The location was perfect. It was accessible to everyone, but it wouldn't interfere with any of the neighborhood's established features. Once we secured the spot, we arranged for a local artist to help restore the fountain. The idea was to give it a fresh look while preserving its original charm. We added decorative elements, engraved stones that told the story of Karen's father, a small plaque dedicated to his memory, and new lighting to make the fountain a beautiful focal point, even after dark. The goal was to make the fountain not only a tribute to the past, but also a lasting gift to the future. After completing the restoration, we presented the finalized plan to the HOA board. They were impressed with how everything had come together, and the committee unanimously voted to approve the fountain's placement in the public space. We had done it. The fountain was going to remain, but it was no longer just a personal piece of decor. It was now a part of the community's history, a shared memory that everyone could appreciate. When the fountain was finally installed, Karen and I stood together by the edge of the water, watching as neighbors gathered around, admiring the beauty of the restored piece. The plaque told the story of her father's craftsmanship, and the fountain sparkled in the sunlight, bringing life to the space. It was everything we had hoped for and more. Karen turned to me, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you for helping me see this through. This is better than I could have ever imagined." I smiled, knowing that we had created something truly special, not just for Karen, but for the entire neighborhood. The fountain was no longer just an eyesore in her eyes. It was now a symbol of community, compromise, and legacy. And as we stood there, watching children run around the fountain, couples taking photos, and neighbors enjoying the peaceful atmosphere, I couldn't help but feel proud. The HOA had been a challenge, but in the end, it brought us closer together as a community. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the HOA Files. Share your thoughts in the comments below and stay tuned for more exciting HOA drama and community stories. Let's keep the conversation going.